Welcome back to breakfast to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. Mel, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Will. Good morning.
Let's start with the welfare reforms that were announced yesterday by the government. Are these broadly things that you think you will be voting in favour of?
So we're going to have to look more closely at the detail on that. But look, let's be clear. This has been rushed. There was no mention even in the Labour Party manifesto, for example, about changes to the PIP benefit. Labour have fought shy on welfare because it's deeply divisive within their own ranks. They've suddenly come to it late in the day because the Chancellor has killed the economy stone dead with her budget last October and now needs to find some money for her emergency budget next Wednesday. So that's what's going on here, and I'm afraid that doesn't make for good policy, particularly in the area of welfare, where you do need to take your time and to be thoughtful about it.
This has been rushed.
Yes.
I mean, so the norm for your party is what? A year per policy? When are we actually going to get a policy?
Well, no, you say it's been rushed.
I'll come back to the welfare statement.
No, on the welfare. Well, you're talking more generally about policy, or
yeah,
we're
because
sticking
I
with
just
welfare?
think it's we'll come back to the welfare, but I just think it's, you know, they've been in government for 8 months. There's an argument to say whether they should have put it in the manifesto or not, but this is an issue that you broadly support. You want to reform welfare payments.
Yes, of course. But my point is there's a way of going about it. So when I was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, I brought in fundamental reforms to welfare, which saved £5 billion across the forecast period. And the OBR said will mean 450,000 fewer people, almost 500,000 fewer people, going on to those long-term sickness benefits. Now, the way you do that is you think very deeply, you consult very widely, and you put together a policy that is fair to taxpayers and also protects the vulnerable. What we've seen here is a scrabbling around at the last minute. They were going to make an announcement at one point, then it got delayed, then it got delayed again, and then the Health Secretary said it hadn't even been discussed in Cabinet and so on. This has been shambolic, and it's been lashed together with a deadline of next Wednesday when they have to show some savings, because the Chancellor has killed growth in this country stone dead. Well, that's the root of the issue here.
Well, we're not in recession. We can come to the economy more broadly.
I didn't say recession, but there is no growth. There's no growth in the economy at the moment.
Nor was there for most of the last government.
Well, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7 when the government took over
for a 6-month period, following a 6-month period where you were in recession. Yeah,
we had about the highest level of employment. We had very low levels of unemployment.
Unemployment's hardly moved since they've come to power. We can come to that in a moment.
Well, we were talking about our record, not what's happened since. What's happened since is growth has been
Was there a recession under the last Rishi Sunak government? Is there a recession now?
The important thing is we went through a cost of living crisis.
Answer me that question. Did you have a recession? Is there a recession now?
So, look, what we're talking about is the general level of growth.
Okay. Was there a recession
on the issue of growth?
Sorry. Was there a recession under Rishi Sunak? Has there been a recession under this government?
So what matters, Wilf, is that
the non-answer
point at which what you were talking about, is that
volumes.
when we had the inflation that was imported through the Ukraine war, we had COVID. That was a very difficult time for the economy, and we got ourselves through that without mass unemployment and all the kind of things that people said would have happened as a consequence of those external factors. The fact of the matter is, on the day of the general election, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. We had near record level of employment, a near record low level of unemployment. We had 13 months of growing real wages, and we brought inflation down from over 11% to bang on its target at 2% on the day of the general election. What this government has done, through taxing the living daylights out of business, through talking down the economy, through taxing and spending and borrowing like it's going out of fashion, is they have killed growth in this country. And that's why they're running around now at the last minute to try and find some money to make up the gap for the spring budget next
The statistic
Wednesday.
that it's the fastest growing economy in the G7 was for a 6-month period that followed a 6-month period of recession. It's all relative.
We had these external factors. You can't just airbrush away COVID and
I'm not airbrushing away.
Well, there were reasons for that. We are now in different territory.
But there's a reason why you were just about the fastest in the G7.
So the reason we had pressure...
the
reason we had pressure was external factors. The reason they have pressure is choices of their own making.
The conclusion, if you'd left it at this, is that both the last year of your government and so far in this government has been lacklustre growth, and we need structural reforms to shake us out of that. And if we said that, we can move on and talk about what we're talking about. But I do think it's important on the welfare reforms, particularly from a former Secretary of State in this area, to come to the gist of it, which is this is an area you wanted to reform. You did some reforms, but there's others you didn't get to. Will you vote in favour of these?
Well, we will need to look at the details. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Do you support the gist of it? What I've said is that it has been rushed. It has not been ambitious enough. They could have gone further in terms of the level of savings that could have been achieved. And the reasons why they haven't made more savings and probably, let's look at the detail, be much fairer to some very vulnerable people is that this thing has been rushed. So let's wait and see. There are some elements of this that will come to the House by way of a statutory instrument. It remains to be seen at this stage whether there'll be primary legislation and then possibly amendments to that and so forth. So the answer to your question is let's wait and see exactly what the detail is as it emerges. But there are many unanswered questions at the moment with these reforms.
Talking of statutory instruments, it was one of those that enshrined into law the target for 2050 to be net zero under the final days of the Theresa May government. She was out criticising on Twitter your leader, Kemi Badenoch, yesterday for saying that we shouldn't have this arbitrary target for net zero by 2050. She said in a long tweet, ended, delaying action will only harm the next generation and increase both the economic and social costs of climate change. You've obviously been part of the Conservative Party and past governments with many prime ministers that have really focused on this. I mean, I think Theresa May and Boris Johnson most clearly, and now obviously a leader that doesn't. What's your personal view on this?
So look, I think, of course, it matters and carbon emissions matter and getting those down. And we've had huge success in doing that, actually, around halving them whilst growing the economy at the same time. And I have huge respect for Theresa and our other Conservative prime ministers and what they did as part of that process. But I think we have to be honest about where we are now. And where we are now is that energy prices are far too high in this country. So if you're a business, an industry or a consumer, our energy prices are about 4 times that of the United States and much higher than many of our European competitors. And that is not sustainable. Now, the Labour Party said they would cut energy costs for consumers by £300. They've gone up by roughly that amount since they came to office. And so we have to get the balance right. And if you have a very long-term target for which there is not a clear enough plan to meet that target and it is not realistic, then it is absolutely right, particularly when you're in opposition and you have now 4 years to do this, to actually go back to square one and see what is feasible and to get the balance right between protecting consumers and the costs and cost of living issues, making sure you have a thriving economy with lower energy costs, at the same time as remaining committed to clean energy. Now, that environmental strand is in the Conservative Party's DNA and has been right back to the days of Margaret Thatcher, who raised these very issues back in the 1980s.
Is it, particularly in light of the path you have ahead of you and the challenges you have ahead of you, is it unhelpful for Theresa May to come out and criticise Kemi Badenoch like that?
Well, as I say, I have a huge respect for Theresa, and I think the broad point that she's making, that is climate change is a very real issue, and we all have a duty to do what we can in a practical and appropriate way to bring down carbon emissions is absolutely right. And we're not resiling from any of that. What Kemi was saying very clearly yesterday is we have an unrealistic target. We know that that is too far a stretch, and we need to re-look at that balance between particularly energy costs and carbon. I mean, look, we have an absurd situation with the Labour Party at the moment in oil and gas extraction in the North Sea, where they are winding that down and not granting licences for further exploration and extraction and making various tax changes to make it less economic to do that, at the same time as importing liquid natural gas from other parts of the world, being more dependent on Russia as a consequence, and actually having a higher carbon footprint as a consequence of those substitution effects. So we really do need to look very closely at what we're doing here and have a more practical policy.
Just quickly to another tweet from a past Tory PM. Boris Johnson on the Trump-Putin call yesterday saying of Putin, he isn't negotiating, he's laughing at us. Publicly, the Prime Minister sort of commended the fact that this phone call took place. Is that still the right tact, that the Prime Minister in the position he has, all the considerations he has to keep Donald Trump on side, needs to be supportive, even if behind the scenes he has to pressure things in the other way?
Well, look, what we need is peace in that part of the world, but it can't be just any peace. It has to be a peace that is a just peace for the people of Ukraine. That has to be a peace that they ultimately agree to. A ceasefire as a stepping stone along the way is clearly desirable. The Ukrainians have agreed to a ceasefire. President Putin, it seems to me, has now come forward with a whole load of caveats around a rather narrower version of a ceasefire. And that does suggest to me that he is not as serious about peace as the Ukrainians are, and that what he wants to do is to continue this war in pursuit of his aims, which is a satellite state at the very least on his frontier that has lost its sovereignty, and that is not acceptable. And that's why it's right that we work with our European partners at looking at what leading role we can play as a country to make sure that wherever this peace deal finally lands, we are there to help make sure that it works and it's workable.
Mel Stride, thanks for joining us as always. Good to see you.